So I'm very excited to share my latest conversation slash interview with a new guest on the channel. This was probably one of my favorite conversations I've had so far. The guest was Dr. Maggie G. Maggie is, I'm just reading her bio here. She is a inquiry and awakening transformative coach. She was also a sociologist, and she's the author of the book How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. She's also busy writing a new book called Awakening to Be Human. And I first came across Maggie through her conversations with Angelo DeLulo on the channel Simply Always Awake. And I just really loved Maggie's story and the way she was expressing about non-duality and awakening. And yeah, the amazing thing for me about Maggie is she was doing a PhD in sociology, and then she shifted from that through awakening into becoming an astrologer and working with people one-on-one doing inquiry. And it was very clear to me listening to Maggie that she has a lot of incredible insight. So yeah, I was very excited to have this conversation with her, and it was such a beautiful conversation. Maggie, I could just feel, is such a wonderful, wonderful human being. It was really lovely. I felt so lucky to engage with her, and just having this conversation felt like it opened up a lot in me, just talking with Maggie. And I hope it's helpful for other people. Some of the topics we got into were discussing awakened teachers and a lot of the dogma around what it means to be awakened and how it's not any way that the mind thinks that it can be. And then we just kind of went down the rabbit hole with a bunch of different topics, and it was a really fun conversation. So I will put Maggie's links in the bio. One thing to say is check out her previous book called How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. It is written around awakening, but from a very non-spiritual perspective. So for any of my viewers, I know that I'm sharing with quite a wide audience. Not everybody is on the spiritual path. A lot of people are here for health information. So this conversation is very much around awakening, but just listen into it and see if anything resonates. And if it doesn't, that's okay. These topics can sound very weird and confusing when we haven't explored them yet. But that's why I think if you're interested, Maggie's book is probably a very good intro to these kinds of things. Maggie recommended it as a non-spiritual introduction to transforming your life through things related to awakening. But if the term awakening doesn't resonate with you, then maybe her book will. And then maybe after that, you read her newest book when it comes out, which I think is more using awakening terminology. I haven't read it myself, but just speaking with Maggie, I think it will be very good. She's a wonderful human being. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Maggie G. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe my first question to you is, how have things unfolded for you since your conversation with Angela? Because that's the last time I heard you speaking about how things have unfolded for you. So instead of like rehashing how did awakening unfold for you? If anybody's listening to this and you want to know about Maggie and her story, I'd say those interviews with Angelo are like great. And then I'm very curious what's been happening for you since, especially I see you've released a new book, and what's happened? How are things unfolded for you?
Uh, it's actually quite funny that we talk about it because I was thinking about those interviews with Angelo just today, funnily enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I realized that this was actually the first time since I've had all those experiences that I got to sit with someone who recognized those things, who knew about those things, and to actually try to put it into words.
Yeah.
Because for about 6 months, maybe to a year, I don't know, I'm so bad with timelines, it's unbelievable. I didn't even think about these things. So like I've gone through those experiences, but there was no like sitting and thinking, is there still a self or is there no self anymore in my experience? Or is this still happening to me or is this not happening to me? Like there was just life, there was just which in and of itself, it's quite interesting because I think with some of the experiences that I had, like that I, have now names for and everything, and the experience of emptiness, which was massive. This would
Right.
be the bit the dying into the void, so to speak,
Right.
and the end of separation and so on, right? Then there was the experience of nothingness that I spoke of, which was that waking up and not being able to find anybody, that's sort of in charge, the doer, or whatever we want to call it, right?
Right.
um there was, at the time, there was kind of eagerness to talk about it because I was like, I want to understand what it is, because remember, I had no frame of reference. I had no knowledge about awakening process. I didn't have any terminology. Like now I'm hearing new terms like stream entry and all sorts of, like, I'm like, what is this? So I'm just like, I've been just trying to figure out how that fits, how this terminology fits into the experiences that I had. But actually there was something else that happened later after those experiences, which I actually, funnily enough, speak about in the first interview with Angela. So the sequence was like upside down a bit.
Yeah.
Which was actually, to me, this was really the end of search, that
Right.
experience, after having had all those experiences, which was like basically, when I don't know if someone is interested in like detail, or like the mechanics of experiences and the new ones, but to me, there's the end of separation, where what some people call the unity,
Right.
or oneness. Some people talk about it as oneness, unity consciousness, maybe, right? So it's like almost like the experience of the divine, the unconditional love at
Yeah.
the core of our being, and so on. For me, this was both perceptual and kind of very visceral experience. But there was still a perception of two things, and there was still a little bit of me left there that felt like something solid. So
Yeah.
the other experience that I speak of as like the stumbling on the isness of like the suchness of life, that was when that perception of two things collapsed entirely.
Right.
You see what I mean? So these are the things that, so I can only talk about it now. So if you ask, speaking about what happened since, it's been about a year and I'm still learning to work out, like I've only recently
Yeah.
worked out the sequence.
Yeah.
And there's so much I discovered in retrospect. Like, first of all, I'm able to kind of understand each shift. You see what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm but only in retrospect, like, and
Right.
why those shifts were important, and what was gone, and what was the difference between the end of separation and the stumbling on isness, and what was the difference between the stumbling on isness and no self, which to me are two different things, although sort of linked. So then I think last year around April, I had no plan to write a book, Kyle. There was no plan. There was no ambition to write another
Yeah.
book or like whatever. And I just, one day I was listening to some podcast and something came up in that podcast that sort of, I ended up just typing some thoughts on that. And I thought, oh, maybe I can cover it on my channel one day. And the typing wouldn't stop. Like, honestly, I was just like writing and writing for it went on for about a month or two. I don't remember. And I ended up sitting in front of like 200 pages of notes. And I'm like, I guess the book wants to write itself. I mean, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a really weird feeling when you're like, something simply sort of arises to do rather than you wanting something. It just
Yeah.
wants itself. It's just, the weirdest thing, which from the point of view of writing a book is not exactly helpful, because like with the first book, I knew exactly why I was writing it. I knew exactly who for. I knew exactly what I wanted to
Yeah.
convey. Whereas with this one, it was like, I have no idea.
So what was that process like? Like you've got these 200 pages. Did you then have to put a lot of work into refining that and like, deciding, yeah, I mean, how did it go from that 200 pages into your final product? Was there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not finished yet, by the way. I'm still
Oh, right, you're still busy with it.
yeah, I'm still finishing up the last draft, or what it seems to be a first draft. Like, I mean, it's been a nightmare. It's like, the typing part, when the stuff was just coming out like one thing after another, that was very enjoyable.
Yeah.
But then putting it into some kind of coherent form,
Yeah.
that was it, because there was so much. The first draft was just, it was honestly, Kyle, it was like, let me tell you about awakening kind of tone, it
Yeah.
was just, I cringed. I was like, oh my, what is this? Like, that's been, you know what I mean? So that was like, oh, like, yeah, it was awful. So first draft gone, binned, nightmare. The second one started getting together, but coming together, and I realized that, because I didn't even know that I bought into this. Is how unconscious so much of the stuff that's happened is like just completely unconscious. I must have bought to this idea that we should just not share our stories, because like people are so fed up with like my story, me, it's all about me, blah blah blah, right? And I get why people see that this way as
Yeah.
well. But quite honestly, that it's all I know. Like, it's
Yeah.
all I know. And in fact, one of the things that came out of my journey was just realizing that I really ultimately don't know what awakening is. So I
Yeah.
cannot
Right.
I cannot, like, honestly, it sounds like in the end, like the last bit of the journey, well, I'm not saying last as in like this was an end point. That's not what I'm trying to say. But like, the last seeing, so to speak, was really that like there is no journey, nobody freaking ever awakened. There's no shifts even, like it was really like super radical. But also that the mystery of awakening was seen in such a powerful way that it was like, I
Yeah.
don't have a clue what awakening is anymore. Like, I
Yeah.
just genuinely don't. Um, I would say, other than what it appears to be, which is pretty much
Yeah.
what all of us are talking about. We
Right.
can only talk about how it appears to be,
Yeah. Yeah.
but not what it actually ultimately is. And I am particularly kind of, and that there's just no ultimate answers. There's no such a thing
Yeah.
as like a correct or incorrect, superior or inferior perspective on awakening. That's just nonsense,
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so yeah, so I suppose that, I was like, I realized that I must have had this kind of uh mm, thoughts somewhere floating around that, yeah, I shouldn't talk about my story, because then people were like, oh, me. But actually,
Yeah.
genuinely, this is all I know.
Yeah.
Everything I say about awakening comes from what's been experienced, and not
Yeah.
from books or anything like that. So that's I can't speak for other people. I can't even though I've learned the new terminology ever since, like the Buddhist
Mm.
terminology, and I'm way more familiar with the different ways people talk about these things. I'm still sticking to speaking about it the way I do, because it's
Yeah.
just, I can't use terms that don't feel right for me, you
Yeah,
know?
but I think like I love that point that you make, because that's the realization that's been arising in my experience as well, is that like that is what is so uh like helpful for people, I suppose, just like listening to this content, is hearing like how does this come out from somebody's perspective, rather than how does this come out of like the Zen tradition, or how does this come out of Buddhism. Like I was listening to your conversations with Daniel Ingram recently, and you made the point of like how Daniel just spoke about like the claim of being an arahant or enlightened or whatever, and how that like just like upset so many people. But it's like, that's for me what I don't know, that's the people that I find the most it's like really breaking down of all views, really, like the views of you shouldn't talk about this or whatever. It's like the only way that we're able to put this process into words is by people talking about their me story, like that's why I'm loving having these conversations with people as well, because it's like, okay, like this is how my narrative thing is making sense of what's happening, and then somebody else speaks about it, but from their perspective, not from like the right perspective, but just from exactly how it's arising for them. And I don't know, that's just I agree, that just feels like the only way to speak about this thing, because there is no other perspective to take except the way things are unfolding for yourself. It's like,
It's music to my ears, so like keep going.
yeah. I'll see what else there is.
No, seriously, but this is such an important, I mean, there's sort of two things here in what you said. I'm not in any way suggesting that everyone who sort of considers themselves to be an arahat or enlightened or liberated, whatever, should now go and announce it to everybody on the street and everybody they come to contact with, and sort of show off, or that. This is not what I'm talking about. What I'm pointing to is exactly what you're pointing to, that I have my education about the awakening process has started sort of after the fact, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Which has been illuminating. And I believe me, I really have a lot of appreciation for the many people that have been through this journey and wrote things down, and hey, this is what that looks like, and hey, don't freak out, that's normal at this stage, or like, it's I'm very, very appreciative, even though I was not following any model, I was not associated with any tradition or anything, right? I never meditated, I've never had any practice. I have very much an appreciation for these things. But to me, there's a real difference between having a respect for a piece of knowledge, or even or respect for a particular teacher and appreciation of their knowledge, and sort of blind following and treating first of all, even Buddha. I'm sorry. I mean, I'm gonna be burnt on the non-dual stake for this, but like, let's not forget that we're dealing with human beings
Right.
who
Yeah.
had who had extraordinary experiences, who thank to those experiences, thank to their experiences, we can learn about those experiences like over the centuries. But let us not forget we're dealing with enlightened human beings are still human beings, and I think and I'm being reminded of this because I get to meet really extraordinary people and wonderful people, who've been on this journey, who I considered, enlightened or liberated, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. And I lost my plot where I was going with this, but that I'm being reminded constantly through what they're sharing, that they're still human. And I think this idea that, being an arahat, like, Kyle, I've heard like quite recently someone literally trashing publicly Daniel and Frank, I think.
Oh yeah.
Frank Yang.
Yeah. I love Frank.
But for different reasons, like they couldn't like, first of all, for the fact that they called themselves Arahat, like that's like, you know, such a sin.
Yeah.
And you know, and I actually, for the same reason, I love that they did that, precisely to go against that idea that the
Yeah.
idea that you shouldn't is somehow this holy rule that should not be broken. So that in of itself is genius. But also things like they couldn't possibly be enlightened because they're vulnerable. They couldn't be possible. They couldn't possibly be enlightened because they display emotions. I mean, there's just
Yeah.
like the multitude of stories and ideas that are floating around about what it means to be enlightened are just that was part of the journey of learning about this process
Yeah.
that shocked me, you know, to
Yeah.
I mean, look, they're definitely another thing that's like the outcome of this of these explorations is actually seeing that, honestly, Kyle, it's so difficult to say where someone is actually at. It's actually really, really difficult because like generally speaking, because at some point it gets so nuanced that you can have two people speaking about awakening and sounding almost like they sound almost the same, like they sound like they're
Yeah.
totally on the same page and speaking about the same things, but actually there's a massive difference,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah. There's so much stuff that I completely agree with there. Like, okay, the point I want to expand on is what you said about, yeah, like when people like give reasons why someone like Daniel Ingram or Frank isn't enlightened. It's just reflecting back onto kind of like, again, the mind trying to turn enlightenment into, oh, it's this way, oh, it's that way. But it's like, yeah, I think I've heard Frank say this before. Many people say this, that it's like, and it reminds me of the way you spoke about this with Angelo as well, is that it's like you're going to like wake up into your own expression of this. You're not going to wake up into the Buddha's expression of this, or any mental idea of what enlightenment is. Like that's kind of what's been happening for me recently, is just realizing it's not about becoming, because Angelo's been one of the teachers that was so helpful for me for so long, and it was that same thing, like, you know, like maybe what happens with people with Buddhism, the way they perceive the Buddha or something. It's like this, somebody on a pedestal, and then it's like coming back to like it's very nuanced, like you say, because there are people that are like going to use this to like I don't know, if there's still like mind and self, the self will kind of try and use this to get something. So there is, you know, that difference, but at the same time, it's like the only way that we can, because like you said, everybody's experience is so can sound exactly the same, but there's really small nuances. I feel like the more that people can just speak openly about this, like, hey, look, this is what I'm experiencing. That's how we can kind of, I don't know, just like as this process unfolds, because I feel like everywhere I look, this is just kind of like a ripple effect with this awakening process, that more and more people are kind of going through it. And I feel like the more people are willing to speak openly about it, like the way Daniel, I love like his just like his analytical approach to it, you know, like the fact that he loves to break down everything. And then there's other people that don't. And I feel like the more that we all talk about this, it's like it can all meet together, and it's like we're all talking about the same thing, but at the same time people can see how we're going to express it completely differently. And by talking about it very directly, we can kind of see where our different expressions are talking about the same thing, you know, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keep
Yeah.
going. No, it's like no, seriously, there's so much to unpack in there, because you know, this is one of the reasons why I am primarily grateful that my journey unfolded without having any frame of reference, without
Yeah.
knowing anything about what Buddhists say, what non-duality says, what Neo Advaita says, or you know,
Yeah.
none of it, because because it was like an open, there was just openness, there was just
Yeah.
there was no possibility to do exactly one of the things that you pointed to, which is to hold on to one perspective, one tradition, one
Yeah.
map, and rigidly be like, oh, so that's how it's supposed to play out.
Yeah.
And the mind, sort of grabs hold of it and closes. So the possibility of anything else happening or different
Yeah.
is kind of like blocked in a sense, because there is this rigidity.
Yeah.
And so there, if there's one time that I am absolutely, and I talked to Daniel about it as well, if there's one point in my journey that I would greatly benefit from knowing a bit more about process of awakening, it would have been when my first dark night hit, which is where I was like, this was after my first, what I refer to as my first awakening, where the existential terror, after like 3 years of living in equanimity, and existential terror, not knowing who I was anymore, neither here nor there, feeling like I was falling apart. And yeah, it was really awful, awful time. And I
Yeah.
know for the fact that had I met Angelo, had I met, um, Daniel, and tell them, what was going on, they'd be like, oh, okay, so that's where
Yeah.
you're at. This is what's going on. Here's the advice, right? Or here's,
Yeah.
yeah. So this is, yeah. So there's absolutely, and I will be the first one to tell you that there is an incredible value in having a teacher or
Yeah.
someone who's been through this journey that can point things, that can see things that we simply don't see, at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time. So even having a teacher at some point, where I really thought there was no seeking going on anymore, to point that I was in fact still, there was still seeking going on, but it was
Right.
just so
Yeah.
subtle, it was so thin, that there was absolutely no way that I would have seen it myself, right? The other point, that the other reason why I'm glad that I that the journey unfolded without frame of reference, without any knowledge, is because the stuff that I came across afterwards, the bashing, the mutual, the
Yeah.
bashing, you're right, you're wrong, this is superior, I know better. I mean, some people seem to like make it to their mission to like discredit other people.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I say this, and that's really important, like this is very human. Like I
Yeah.
played out my own version of those behaviors, maybe not in a such a overt way, but there's absolutely no part of me that assumes that I was not, in fact, I know for sure that I was a spiritual asshole, and that there was a period of time when I had that kind of superiority going on and
Yeah.
looking down, and I know better, and so I'm not, when I speak of those not so pretty behaviors, I'm really not suggesting that I'm somehow immune or
Yeah.
saintly or holier than holy. In fact, the opposite, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
always assume that I BS myself, even though I might
Yeah.
not be aware that I do that. But this was something that I must say came as a shock for me, as not because it is a very human thing, but that the people who teach about enlightenment behave that way. You know what I mean? Because to me, one of the sort of byproducts of awakening is really seeing that no perspective is the truth. No
Yeah.
perspective
Yeah.
is fixed and solid, that they're just different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so, there's, and I actually love the fact that there are so many different perspectives, because like people like Daniel years ago, I would not be able to listen to him,
Yeah.
not even for 5 minutes, because
Yeah.
it was just just too much and too much
Yeah.
information. There's one particular woman that I don't think she considers herself a teacher, so I don't know really how to refer to her, but you know, she speaks about a lot about non-duality and her journey, a lot. And you know, I came across her video a while ago, and she was like, there's nobody, there's no journey, there's been, you know, nobody awakens, and like, you know, and I'm thinking, oh my God, if I came, and I love listening to her. I think
Yeah.
she's amazing. I think she's one of the most,
Who
she
is
reminds
it?
me, Susan Chang, I
Oh,
think is
I
her
love
name.
Suzanne. Yeah.
Right, Susan is she's brilliant. She's just so, just like Frank, you know, there's such a, I love that authenticity,
Yeah.
and that kind of level of honesty. And but believe me, had I come across Susan,
Mm.
you know, a while ago, I'd be like, is this like is this not like, is this a dissociation of some sort? You know, is
Yeah.
this what is this bullshit? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, you know, or whatever, right? So this is what I mean. This just you know, one of the most amazing kind of insights out of this journey was seeing that really there are simply different perspectives, and
Yeah.
you know, and it was and it's not about right or wrong, it just what works for you at the
Yeah,
time,
exactly.
right?
What resonates, you know, there's it's exactly how you say it with like teachers. There's no like, oh, okay, Angelo's a better teacher than Suzanne and Frank and Daniel. It's like, well, if you listen to Angelo and Frank and Daniel and you and everybody, and whose video like resonates with something inside of somebody, like that's what matters. And
Yeah,
then it's like you say, on the journey, because I think that's, like you said, like that's part of what happens is as we drop our own kind of like small mind limited perspectives, then all these, like you can just see it everywhere. You're like, oh yeah, like that person is talking about the same thing, and you can just have this appreciation, like you said, for all the different expressions of it. And like you said, it's so important that there are these myriad of different people expressing it in different ways, because it just it makes that accessible for just everybody coming from different cultural backgrounds, different minds, different personality types. And it's like to see, wow, there's a young person talking about it, there's an old person, there's a female, there's a male, there's an athlete, there's a like whatever. It's like, oh wow, it's like they're talking about the same thing. You know, there's no longer this, oh yeah, it's about like somebody from a tradition sitting in the mountains, like
yeah,
that's who wakes up. You know,
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
everyone. One other thing I wanted to touch in about what you said was the uh, like people, the bashing online, right? Because it's interesting. I see that so much as well, and it's like you said, it's such a human thing, right? It's like it's so specifically like an online human thing. Like I just it's the way I feel like humans express now, because of this space that we have where you feel like you've got this distance, you know, like I can say whatever I want and then I can go and hide. And it brings out the worst in us, really, because I see it so much. So I speak a lot about health, like chronic health issues as well, because that was kind of my entry point into awakening. So that's one of the big things that and now I'm much more enjoying talking about awakening and this thing, but that's where I started. And the amount of like bashing in that space, where anybody that would recover from the like long COVID or these chronic states where somebody gets really stuck, and then what kind of happens is like an identity forms, and then anybody that says it's possible to break free of that, you know, it's possible to fully recover, it's like that person. And it's interesting, I understand exactly how it's happening, because like it's a threat to that identity structure that there's a way out, you know. So that is why like people will be so bitter and harsh online, is because it's like you're saying that like it's threatening to them, you know, so they feel the absolute need to attack. And it's the same thing, like you said, with like teachers even doing this, because there's obviously still some subtle ego that they don't want to acknowledge, and then now, you know, somebody else speaking from a deeper perspective is really threatening whatever little identity structure is left. So it's like understanding how our identity, I think Angelo probably really helped me understand this, because he talks about so much about the nature of identity, and it's like you can see how that plays out in all of these different areas of humanity, where it's always about somebody trying to defend identity, you know, and that's what brings out this like this real attack between people. And it's quite crazy to see how it plays out, how we can delude ourselves, I suppose, you know, like we can talk about the deconstruction of this identity from a place of trying to defend the identity. it's
Yeah.
quite crazy, like the
Yeah. And it
yeah
can get so, this is so, everything you said is just, honestly, we could like unpack like at least four things that you just mentioned and go there. I think this is, you know, this is so, you know, one of my favorite quotes, I'm a total quote junkie, you know,
yeah
there's a quote that I think by Ram Dass, that when you know how to look, everything is a teacher, you know? And to me, this is such a wise quote, because this is actually incredibly teachable, to not just notice that in teachers, but to also notice that in ourselves.
yeah yeah
Right? Because like and it really kind of it destroys that seeming gap between
yeah
me and the teacher. Okay.
yeah
And it destroys this idea of putting the teacher on a pedestal and assuming that they should, you know, because we have so many, like, believe me, I had prejudice. Whoa, what's
whoa
happening?
fireworks.
Happening.
You made a great point there, and Zoom appreciated
Yeah.
it.
Thank you. Whoever behind this
Whoever's behind
situation.
that, thank you.
Um, but no, it really is teachable, because I didn't even know I had prejudices when it comes to like how a non-dual teacher should behave, or how they should not behave, or what they should say or shouldn't say, you know, to the point of like things like they should not be moody, they should not be abrupt in the way they respond, they should not be annoyed, you know, like just even like little things like that, because
Yeah,
we're not even aware that we're creating this image of, like I said, an enlightened person as, you know, sort of holier than holy,
yeah,
like a saint, some kind of a sainthood status, you know what I mean? And then obviously we expect those kind of those kind of behaviors. So as painful as it is to watch, for example, certain teachers, incredible teachers, by the way, who then we hear about, you know, maybe some, you know, some drama, some cheating scandals, or some other shadowy bits, you know, sort of playing out, you know, it's again an opportunity that's so teachable in and of
yeah,
itself, because it continually reminds us that still human. and
yeah,
and
exactly.
this is why, and this is why, and by the way, I'm not saying this is not the same as like condoning or excusing.
Yeah,
That's not what I'm speaking of. It's just really like, and I think that the traditionalist uh, a, a point of view kind of perpetuates this idea of this purity, you know,
yeah,
this saint, almost saint-like kind of state of being, that the enlightened person is, or something like that. And I really think that's not helpful, and it's actually one of the reasons why, you know, so many people that I met who come from traditions, because of this ideal of purity, you know, they would suppress so much that was sort of coming up for them naturally, like, I should
yeah,
not be angry. And so then the anger would be suppressed and then come out in ways less than healthy, because of
yeah,
course it will, in like acting out, you know,
yeah,
later on. So there's just so much, you know, and even like prejudices in terms of when there's this rigidity of how these things should play out. It's like, I love every time I hear somebody's story and it defies the rules. You know,
Yeah.
like there's
Yeah.
an aspect. So for example, it is believed that like unity consciousness as a stage has to last for years. But that is, I know already multiple examples of that not being true.
Yeah.
That Kundalini is really something that happens at the start, and it's like the beginning of the journey. But in my case, it was quite literally toward like the end, so to speak. You know, so that's life continuously being the best teacher,
Yeah.
saying, do not hold on to anything known.
Yeah.
Do not grasp, do not hold on to anything as fixed.
Yeah.
So it continuously, so like that's why I said, like people like Frank Young, I thought this was like Frank Young because he's so you know, such an eccentric, and he has the kind of
Yeah.
like eccentric expression, although he's much calmer now from like the
Yeah.
way, you know, he's right. But I thought it was such a good news like for the non-dual community, or
Right.
like whatever,
Yeah.
because I thought it continuously brings this um this enlightenment that still is presented as something, you know, almost unattainable for like mere
Yeah.
mortals, to this like saying, no, look, Frank found this freedom, and you
Yeah.
know, and here's another person, and here's another person, and you know, believe me, there's a lot of undermining happening. I've been undermined several times, you know. It's just because we also judge people, you know, based on appearances, you know, the first
Yeah.
impressions, you know, someone doesn't sound, you know, people were surprised that, you know, I was an academic
Yeah.
and doing my PhD because I didn't sound academic, you know, or now it's
Yeah.
like, you know, I couldn't possibly know anything about awakening because I am so loud and laugh so much and
Yeah. Yeah.
swear
Yeah.
so much, you know. It's like I couldn't possibly know that. So, you know, people have been doing this in sort of, speaking of the behaviors, you know, the sort of covert and more overt and more covert ways of invalidating other people's experiences,
Yeah.
uh, or, you know, invalidating somebody else's experience because your tradition says something else, or because this
Yeah.
is not what you know, or because this is not my experience, so I'm going to invalidate your experience because it doesn't match mine. You know, there's just
Yeah.
so much of that going on, and believe me, I'm really aware of how subtle this can be. And even in, you know, I know for the fact that I invalidated people's experiences sometimes,
Yeah.
um, even though it wasn't my intention
Yeah.
to do so, but you know, it still happened. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And it's like, I mean, okay, so many good things there, but let me the ones that stood out, like that's one of the things that I love. For me, I guess once you have a little bit of insight, like I don't know, again, like I have no idea where anybody's at, or any of that. Like I'm kind of like, I remember when you were talking with Angelo in your interviews, and he's so good at being able to talk about this stuff. It's actually incredible, like his clarity. And you were just like, how do you even talk about this? I don't know. And that's how I feel now. I'm just like, I find the words, it's helpful to have listened to people like Angelo who are so good at expressing, because
Yeah.
then when you're having these own experiences yourself, it's like, oh my God, that's what Angelo is talking about. And you can appreciate it even more. I can be like, wow, like how the fuck did he find out a way to talk about this? Like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
For me, writing this book has been
mm,
learning to actually put it into words. But you're right,
yeah,
Angelo, I mean, there's lots of amazing people out there, okay? But to me,
yeah,
like
for sure.
Angelo in particular, and Daniel are really brilliant when it comes to like being able to like go right into like the mechanics of the
Yeah.
experience. So yeah, really good.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But what I wanted to say was like that when somebody reaches a certain stage, maybe for me, that's what makes the difference between somebody that's actually has genuine kind of insight, is the way that they're fearlessly able to express themselves, you know, like the way that you said, like for some people it would piss them off how you swear and you're loud and you're expressive, and they're like, okay, that's not awakening. Whereas for me, it's like people like you and Frank and Daniel who are just so kind of authentically themselves. It's like, yeah, that person is not holding on to any validation seeking of like, oh, okay, I need to act the way that people want me to act. It's like, and it's such an invitation as well. There's another guy, Matt Garrett, who's been really helpful for me because he's a really young guy, and he continuously talks about this. Like, it's in when somebody steps into their own expression, it's such an invitation for everybody else to step into their
Oh,
own
yeah.
expression. Because again, you see, like, there's no, like the other point you made, like, there's no exalted state of enlightenment that is apart from our humanness. Like, that's so key. Enlightenment is not this transcendence. It's like, it is, and of course it's nuanced. Like there are like, yeah, Angelo said something the other day where it's like you become entirely human, but you're not like, that can become a fixation as well, you know, like, oh, I'm just a human. And it's like, yes, but there's also like the absolute insights. But it's so easy for the mind to want to grab on here or there, you know. It's like, it's both. It's like the most human, and with all of your mistakes, you know, with all of our kind of you know, like you said, like we for me myself, I feel like the more I allow myself to make mistakes, just to get things wrong, to express, but if your heart is in the right place, I feel like that's how you just keep refining your that's how this goes deeper. It's not from a place of like safety, of like, oh, okay, I need to talk about this in a way that I don't make any mistakes and I don't piss anybody off and I don't kind of challenge the paradigms. It's more like challenge the paradigms, have people kind of come at you with their pitchforks, and then that will show you, like, for me, that's been part of the best learning experiences, is like seeing both sides of it. Like, when I really piss somebody off, it's like, that's actually a relief for me to be like, oh, okay, there's nothing to run from anymore. It's like, they hate me. Cool. Okay. It's like such a freedom. But at the same time, it's like, am I like getting something out of challenging people, you know? And it's like, it reveals both sides for me. It's like, oh, okay, there's still, but the only way that it reveals is not from playing it safe. I guess this is just my like expression of this, is like, you have to be willing to take those risks, and then, you know, we learn from each other, we crack each other open, you know, like as somebody responds to what I'm saying, that helps bring out the emotion in me, and then it's like, yeah, I don't know, all of that.
Yeah, no, again, everything you said, you know, it's like, see, that's the trouble with this stuff. It's like, you know, I'm listening to you and I see like a list of things and directions
Right.
we could go, and then I'm like, where am I going? I have no idea. You know,
Exactly the same when you're talking. It's like something pops up, and
right?
then it's like, okay, well, let's see what happens when
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not
No,
saying, yeah.
it's again so much in what you said, you know, because I think the it's so easy also to like assume that you're zen and sort of there's nothing else there that's triggered, you know, when you're
Mm,
actually you don't let life impact you. So like if you're just
mm,
surrounded by yes sayers and people who look up to you and just agree with you know, or you live, you know, in the middle of nowhere with, you know, an animal that will always listen to you no matter
yeah.
what, you know, right? And he's not gonna
Yeah,
question you and he's not gonna attack you and you know, whatever. Then you don't even know. So you don't actually know. But to me, the
yeah,
freedom, you know, one of the most amazing sort of insights has been that it's not freedom, you know, from having human experience, however it
yeah,
looks. It's a freedom to have a full-on human experience, right?
yeah,
And so, you know, all those moments actually that are, you know, triggering are just beautiful. I mean, the like it's
yeah,
they're really invitations, because again, life itself, this extraordinary teacher, you know,
mm,
just exposing to you what
yeah,
wants to be seen, like what's going on with, like, why are you getting so triggered, you know,
mm,
about this? Not because you shouldn't get triggered, not because
yeah,
there's anything wrong with being triggered, but just to have a look like, okay, what is this, trying to reveal, whether it's some kind of insecurity, or whatever, which is why, like the Daniel, the backlash, the bashing that Daniel got, I was complete, and continues to get, and even he will admit, that this was kind of expected, given the whole arahatness thing, and whatever. So he recognizes that this was to be expected from certain people, but I was like, wow, to be in the fire of that, it's something else. And I really applaud this because it's exactly like you said, there comes a point where it's not even that you're trying to provoke or not provoke. It's just that awareness is not even there. It's just life. It's just whatever is. So,
yeah, exactly.
it's that, you're not, it's just even the trying to, what I call like the trying to manage your image, that is very kind of, which is very much at the core of the identity, it's like, because wherever there's identity, no matter how thin, no matter how little of it is left, there will always be there will always be the inherent insecurity linked to it. So there will be a need to defend or to protect or impose or prove. Kyle, I went through that stage of like, I must prove and I must do my best to show how much I know about awakening, and then obviously if someone came at me questioning that, that was like, like really rattling and like affecting even my nervous system, and just really I had this like feeling so threatened, because that's what identity does. It's a sense of threat, right? So I had that going, but even that insecurity was so beautiful, because again, life again, the greatest teacher saying that insecurity is there because there's more for you to see. Keep going. You know what I mean? So there's literally nothing that's in life that arises, that we're experiencing, that is not supposed to be there. Everything is there, and it's literally so teachable. Again, when we're willing to look that way and we're curious, every moment teaches you something,
yeah exactly. So much there. But just to carry on that frame, like it's every, like I was speaking with Josh. I don't know if you know Josh. He's like a friend of Angelo's, who's also speaking online about this. Very like authentic guy. His
sure.
okay.
What's the name of the channel?
So Awake.
Oh yeah, I think I'm from. I don't think I've ever listened to him, but I think I now know who you're speaking of. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we were chatting about this, and he was saying like the integration never ends. Like that's life continuously showing you where there's still, like, even if it just becomes ways of talking about this, but it's like that process of life showing you. But like you said at the end there, the willingness to see is what is like the difference between fighting against it, and I guess like it's both sides of it, right? Even when we're willing to see it, we will initially maybe get caught up in the fighting, where it's like, no, I don't want to see that. And then eventually it's like that burning desire for truth trumps the resistance. And it's like, okay, I have to acknowledge that I was holding on to a view there. And it's like you said, though, like you only realize that from being willing to express, like, vulnerably, being willing to, like, I can't remember exactly what you said now, but like talk about it, and then somebody challenges that, and it's like, through, if you try to stay safe and you hadn't like spoken about it and made that mistake, it's like that's what reveals the like the process deepening itself, you know. But it's like you say that there's nothing like either way, life will show you. You know, it's
Yeah.
like if you try to fight it or if you try to do your best, it's like either way, you know, you're gonna see it, right? It's like suffering, I guess. Any kind of like struggle that becomes your kind of like pointer, right? It's like, okay, what is, but it's like a ruthless honesty within yourself. That's all it can come down to in the end, because it's like we can portray these, okay, it's like you said, like I've noticed that in myself as well. It's like this need to prove, like, okay, look at my insight, or look, you know, or also this like wanting to, this validation, right? Wanting to be
Of
validated
course.
by a spiritual teacher of like, you know, oh, can you acknowledge that I am, you know, at this level or something like that. And it's like it only you in the end. I mean, that's where a teacher is really helpful, to go back to what you said earlier, like somebody to point you out even when you can't see the subtle seeking, because often you can't. But I've lost my train of thought there. But yeah, something like
Yeah, no, but
that.
like honestly, it's like if I were to say something about, you know, like the sort of key things that stand out to me about it is really honesty. And it
Yeah,
sounds so easy because just be honest, but actually when I didn't realize how I was bullshitting myself,
yeah,
so I didn't even know that I was not honest with myself, let
yeah,
alone being honest with other people, you know?
yeah.
So, and again, when you know, this stuff is really innocent. Okay. I can't underline this enough.
Mm,
Like it's not, this stuff is happening and it's not there to, you know, beat ourselves up over it and oh my god, I screwed up
yeah,
again, and
yeah.
oh my god, I was reactive, oh my god, I was selfish, oh my god, I was whatever. It's like it to me, this switch, you know, we talked about with Daniel about avoidance, right?
Mm.
And to me, this awakening journey has been literally the opposite of avoidance, you know what I mean?
Right,
So like,
yeah,
and that avoidance plays out in such a well disguised way. Sometimes it's completely obvious.
yeah,
Like, for example, as soon as we feel uncomfortable, we go and stuff ourselves with the burger and fried, like, you know, and like
yeah,
5 tubs of Ben and Jerry, or like, you know, or we go and reach for a drink, or we go and reach for a book or something to numb ourselves or
yeah.
distract, you know, whether it's, so there are the overt ways, but the kind of almost obvious, right? But then there's other ways that are not that obvious,
Mm,
actually, you know, that
mm,
get that actually get more and more and more subtle, you know.
mm.
And
That's a good
so
point. Yeah,
it really requires um you know, the kind of honesty that um you know, it's not easy to see certain things, you know,
yeah,
and be honest. And you know, for me, but like I said, the journey has not been about getting rid of anything or
yeah, yeah,
fixing anything. It was actually about seeing what's there
yeah,
and seeing it for what it is,
yeah,
and
yeah.
not, you
Exactly.
know, and not backing out, not going around it, not tiptoeing
Yeah,
around it. But like, so, you know, if there was, let's say, a part of me that uh you know, I realized, you know, I was accusing someone of lying, you know, to me, and then I realized that I was actually not honest with that person either. So in a way, so
mm,
I was a liar as well, but
mm,
in maybe ways that I didn't see, you know, even the white lies, the half truths, you know,
yeah,
these are not comfortable things to see, you know,
yeah,
those realizations. And when, and they're sometimes they're so uncomfortable that like they quite literally annihilate you, like
yeah.
to the ground. And it can be very intense process for many, but maybe it doesn't have to be. Like, I really don't know how, if everyone
Yeah.
has to go
Yeah.
through that. But yeah, the honesty, it sounds you know, sometimes when I see people one-on-one, it's like I can literally, they will either say this or I can literally see it in their face. I said, just be with what is without trying to do anything about it, you know, because
Yeah.
like, because even the question, what can I do about this? It's already resistance to what,
Yeah.
to just being with what's happening. And so when I say, like, you know, about being with what is, it's almost like I get this look of like, this can't be this simple. Like this can't
Right.
be, right? This can't be this simple. But actually, just because it sounds simple
Mm.
doesn't mean that it's actually easy. You know, it's
Yeah.
actually
Yeah,
the
exactly.
hardest thing to do, to
Yeah.
be with the discomfort of our experiences and whatever is arising, and not trying to numb ourselves or sedate in any way or
Yeah.
escape from that experience. So honesty and non-avoidance, you know,
Mm.
huge part
Mm.
of this journey. And with integration, I agree as well. I think for as long as you're actually realizing the layers of conditioning
Yeah.
are, it gets so subtle. Like, for example, in my experience, it's so much in the body at this point that I don't even
Yeah.
know what's going on. Like, I'm just like, I
Yeah.
don't know what the real, my nervous system sometimes will fire up in situations that I'm like, where the hell did that come from? Like, I just get like, what is going on, you know? But you kind of, there, you know, there's a stage of integration where it kind of asks us to be curious and open, and
Yeah.
it takes a bit of an effort, even though
Yeah.
it might feel that way. But then there's an integration that's sort of like everything is just in your face, whether you like it or not. So whether
Yeah.
you're curious or not, it doesn't matter, because it's like,
Yeah.
yeah. But even then, you know, it's, believe me, okay, this has been, I've been seeing this like over and over again, that we really be as ourselves, like just like in ways that like,
Yeah.
um you know, I can see people who are really, I'm talking really profoundly awake people who, you know, will say that they no longer do something,
Mm.
only to see them do it like in the next sentence or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, but and again, I'm not saying this in a way of like pointing fingers, because I don't see, I genuinely kind of don't see, I don't see the other. When I see a behavior like this,
Mm.
something like this play out, I quite literally see myself.
Mm.
I see myself in them,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so immediately that tells me, if they don't see it, I definitely, I also don't see it. Like, I can be
Yeah.
saying something that I think is true, only to contradict myself in the next sentence, but I will not be
Yeah.
seeing it unless someone points this out to me. So
Yeah.
like the best, I would say, the one of the greatest outcomes of this journey was like just to not assume that I don't BS myself. Just like
Yeah.
I just assume that I do BS myself. I'm just not aware, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like, it's so refreshing. Like when that's just, I guess, what makes us as, I mean, I can't speak for everyone. I can only speak for myself, but that's for me what's so refreshing with people like with like Daniel or and you, when you can openly say, like, that's what I loved with your conversation with Daniel, where, you know, you would say something about him, like, you know, let's acknowledge the shame that I feel that I judged you like this. And he was like, well, maybe you were right. You know, maybe I was just speaking a load of crap or something. And it's like, yeah, when somebody is that willing, like myself as well. I mean, I don't even know what I'm talking about half the time. I just speak about what feels right. I have no
Same,
idea.
Kyle, same.
I have no idea if I have the right to speak about this. Like, it, you know, I'm just, if people say it's helpful, so I enjoy doing it. And to be honest though, the more I speak about whatever, the more it just, the intuition shows clearly that it's the right thing to do, because it opens things up more. You know, it's like the more it's like where it's this, like, whenever I retract from life and try to stay safe, it feels suffocating. And then it's like whenever you just kind of pour into it, for myself, it's like, okay, that is right. And sure, I'm probably like contradicting myself and, you know, pissing people off and making mistakes. And it's like, I'm here for it. If that's what I got to
Yeah,
do, that's what I got to do, uh
yeah.
but
But have you
what
noticed like that Daniel, he wouldn't even, he didn't take it personally, right? Like, I
yeah,
mean, he
exactly.
didn't take it personally in that, and even if he did take it personally, by the way, it's fine. It's like
Yeah,
I'm not expecting of anyone, including Daniel or anyone else, to not take things personally. Like, there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with that. But there's something when we recognize um, parts of ourselves that maybe are considered shameful,
yeah,
or I don't know, wrong, should not, when we recognize them in ourselves, there's really, um, when people say that when you awaken, everyone else awakens. And
yeah,
there's such a truth to that, because
yeah,
when we see those parts in ourselves and they are free to be seen and what I call like come home,
yeah.
um then out of that emerges what I call like the compassion with capital C,
Mm,
where even when you see those things in other people,
yeah,
you can even maybe call it out. Sometimes you might even call it out. It's like
yeah,
you may mention, you may not mention. It depends on
yeah,
the context and circumstances. You don't do that out of I caught you, look at
yeah,
me, I'm like this righteous
yeah,
superiority
yeah,
of like I'm better than you and I caught you and look at you, blah blah blah. There's literally, you see because you saw those parts in yourself, you see them in others too, and you so get that.
yeah,
And there's you
exactly.
get that, and you can, even when you speak up, it doesn't come from a place of superiority. It doesn't come from a place of like Adyashanti, I think, would call it like from a divided place, from
Mm,
hatred or from
mm,
from from like judgment or anything like that. You just get that. You just
yeah,
get that, and you
yeah,
understand, and you also get that we just don't see what we don't see.
yeah, yeah,
That's why it's called blind spots. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
so there's a natural kind of uh compassion for for our human condition,
yeah.
that connects us all, regardless of where we're at, awaken, not awaken, who cares, we're still human. And
Mm,
that's primary, one of the main reasons why I didn't, it's sort of the title came up. The title of the second book is going to be Awakening to be Human, because
mm,
it's actually, the sort of circle of we start as a human trying to get out of our humanness and suffering. We then
yeah.
do the journey, and it's almost like, well, at least, that's what's been like for me too. Like, you sort of die in that process, only to
Mm,
be back to what's left of just the free expression that's now not
mm,
filtered through the identity stuff. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So in a way, I am even more ordinary and more human than I've ever been.
Right? Yeah,
It's to me that's the ultimate beauty of it, that
yeah,
it's
yeah,
so
exactly.
ordinary and so available. And by the time, I think again, quote, so I have like, a list. What was the quote? The enlightenment is ego's ultimate disappointment. And
Mm,
that's absolutely, I would so agree with that, because
mm,
by the time you sort of wake up to the reality with capital R, there's quite literally nobody there to feel special. Like,
yeah,
there's nothing left of you to like to feel special or superior. So it's like it just
yeah,
doesn't make sense to speak in those terms about alignment at all.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I mean one point that just I really liked because it's I've heard people speak about it before, that like when you wake up, everybody wakes up. And it was like I remember hearing that like a year ago or something like that. And it's like you can kind of make sense of it a little bit, but it's become so clear in my experience recently as well. It's just how like but specifically once we've like integrate like all those points you made of integrating all of the parts of ourselves that we would normally want to call out in other people, because like you said, like that wanting to call it out in somebody else when it's coming from the divided place, like you said, like, haha, I got you, is because it's like reflecting our own belief that is bad, like that part of ourselves has to stay hidden. So now we're looking for it in other people. It's like, okay, I'm not a person that experiences guilt or anger or shame, so when you do it, you're wrong. And then it's like that shift when okay, so now you've integrated that within yourself and you see it in other people. And I find for myself, there's still times where I catch the judgment. It's like, oh, wait, why was I judging that person? Oh, okay, it's about this or it's about that. But the just to go back to what I wanted to speak about was the realizing how, I don't know, it just became so clear for me recently, like within my family. It's like, because I've gone through this process, the dynamics are just like beautiful, the way everything, but it wasn't for a long time, right? It's like the first shift, like that equanimity, and then like the all the intense crazy stuff. And in that time, it was like my family was just triggering everything, right? It was just like, oh my gosh, this is so horrible. And then eventually it's like, wow, like nobody else needs to even wake up, because it's like it's that. And that's where that, I don't know if this is what was meant by the quote, but that's where that quote makes sense for me now, is like, through this shift happening in me, and who knows why it happened in me, and I don't even know any of that, but like it was almost like it needed to happen in this person for the dynamics to smooth out everywhere else. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I haven't really spoken about that before, but it's just, you kind of pulled that out of me when you said that. Whereas like, I look at my family and it's like, now you don't need to wake up. You don't need to become spiritual. You can be like a friend or a family member. So you just be your most authentic expression of yourself. And it's beautiful. Like when there's no more need for anybody else to be a certain way. And then that's for me when that all made sense. It's like, oh yeah, it's like everybody wakes up when one does, or something like that,
It's totally, I mean, I understand that, it can sound a bit weird or maybe even confusing, but there's, you don't even see a person that's not awake. You know what I mean? It's and what do I mean by that? Because this is the bit that I know it's confusing, because I recently had a conversation with someone about that, who was confused about, what that means. It's not that, when you realize the natural state, probably Frank would call it like the natural state, because I don't even know what word to use anymore, quite frankly. It just doesn't apply. It's like, it's then you recognize everyone as that, so to speak. You see everyone as that, you know what I mean? So whether they know that, that's a different story. Whether they themselves woken up to this realization, that's a different story. But they are that, whether they realize or not. So in that sense, you just don't, I can't, to me, like, even if I tried, I wouldn't know how to see that differently. Like, I don't, I genuinely, I can't recall what separation feels like, like, or like even seeing the other, like it's like as like a part. Of course, in terms of like the color, the look, the appearance, of course there's a difference, right? But like the fundamental difference between me and someone else, nope, can't find it. So
yeah.
And you're and you're absolutely right. It's like, this was actually one of the most amazing realizations, because I'm such a freedom freak, and I've always wanted people to be free to be themselves. And I never liked people, because I don't like when someone tries to impose or change or anything on me. Then I always wanted people to feel the same, like that they're free to just to be. So but I actually didn't realize that even the forget about like expecting that, I don't think I ever expected or wanted my family members to awake. I don't remember. But there was still an expectation of, like, underlying, like I didn't even know I had an expectation for them to be a certain way or not be
Yeah.
a certain way, whatever that might be, right? And
Yeah.
so you're absolutely right. It's like when you're free, the world genuinely becomes free. The
Yeah.
world is free to be, the people you're around are free to be. So they're no longer held hostage by our insecurities and
Yeah.
our, whatever I called it, like needinesses, that come
Mm.
out of that identity that needs to feel secure and needs the world
Yeah.
or people to be a certain way in order to have that security. So it's wonderful to hear you. It's wonderful to hear you talk about that, because it
Mm.
really is a freedom for everybody involved in.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, totally. And I like that point you make where we can like it's so sneaky, but it's like we can convince ourselves that we want somebody else to be free. And essentially though, like we're kind of not letting them be who they are, right? We're like, oh, I want you to be more free. And that means you exactly as you are right now, but we don't like even see that within
Yeah.
ourselves, you know?
I want you to be free, except of point A, B, C.
Yeah. Except I want you to be free, so stop doing this and this and this, and then you can be free in my
Yeah.
eyes, you know.
And you know what's amazing? That when people actually feel that you're not trying, it's actually, you don't even have to say anything. It's like when that need for people to be anything other than they are drops,
Yeah.
they actually relax around you.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
actually can feel that they're not being, because you may not say it, but they will feel judged, or they will feel
Yeah.
like you think that they're wrong, or you think that they should
Mhm.
be something else, right? And so, like sometimes they say like it takes two to tango to like create the change in the dynamic, but sometimes it really just takes one, because
Yeah.
when you're free, then like truly, and then someone else is free, and then it's a completely, and that improves the dynamic, because the person doesn't feel the pressure. And I think one of the trickiest things is to actually see how much of this is what I say, where the sort of BS is under the noble disguise, where we're
Mm.
trying, our attempts to want to help or fix or save or whatever actually are so selfish that have absolutely nothing to do with the other
Yeah.
person actually, but it's really our way to avoid drama or avoid something. So it comes
Yeah.
back to uh you know let's say someone has like a terrible mood or something like that, so we will want to fix it and change it because we actually have trouble
Yeah.
being with that mood or with that emotion, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it that alone is like fascinating, how these things that on the surface look very noble and kind and
Yeah.
helpful and everything actually are so incredibly selfish,
Yeah.
it's astounding. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it just comes back to avoidance, like which you brought up earlier, and I love it because it's like so fundamental to this whole thing of suffering. It's like I guess that's just what became clearer and clearer and clearer to me. It's like as avoidance. I was driving today, and it was just like a thought that popped up where it was like because I'm thinking of ways of talking about this, and it was like the biggest mistake we ever made, and we never made this mistake, but like a way to talk about it was the belief in avoidance, in the belief of like there's like who knows when that came about in the human, I don't know, evolution. Like it feels so contradictory talking like this because it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
but just to do it, that's the big mistake. It's like avoidance, and if you can just uh keep seeing that like there's nothing to avoid. I feel like I'm going back a little bit, but it kind of ties in again. It's like it's so simple, but it's so difficult, right? It's so difficult for us to see that in ourselves, and that is always what is underlying all of this conflict and this need for that group to be different and that person to be different. And it's like all of, like you said, all of these like noble, justifiable things to do. It's like you got to be so honest with yourself. It's like, yeah, because I don't want to feel this,
Yeah.
it's like That's what it is. Like you got it. I don't want to feel this. So
Yeah.
you can't be that. And it's like you said, once that disappears, right? That's the best thing you can do for anybody, because sure, like people, their heart might be in the right place, but the mind might be deluding things, where it's like, okay, I want to do good in the world, like I want to alleviate human suffering or something like that. And then it's like, well, the way you do that is you see through all your own bullshit, you integrate all the parts of yourself, and then you can just be the space of yourself. And it's like you said, it doesn't even take two to tango. It takes that person being like so fully in themselves and everything that it just relaxes the other person as well. And it's like, and the key, like I love what you said, the key is judgment, right? That's what's missing when somebody relaxes. It's like, oh wow, there's no judgment here. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, I can just be myself, and I can be parts of myself. But that also doesn't mean that, going back to what you're saying earlier, that doesn't mean that we don't point something out if somebody's like overstepping, because people can take advantage of that. I've found, where I've often been like that. Okay, I'm just the space, and then it's like, okay, but I still actually need to set my boundaries if somebody's like
Oh,
just
yeah.
just abusing that.
Yeah, but that's the point. It's not about it's not actually, I mean, it's not about in the way I see it, that it's not about not being judgmental, because to me it's like to be non-judgmental, it's like we would have to stop being human or shut up forever. Like, I mean, quite
Yeah,
literally everything that comes out of our mouth, every opinion, everything we
yeah.
say is a sort of a judgment. And actually, I'll tell you, there's a bit in my journey, speaking of judgment, where I was going through this like real intense shadow stuff, and to the point of like finding like narcissist in me. Like, I mean, there was no like end to this. And it got to the point where to even try not to be judgmental was like narcissistic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because it's
yeah.
like, because it was actually, I know it sounds crazy, but it actually, in a sense that it had everything to do with me. Like, I have to
Yeah.
try to be non-judgmental, because either I don't want, as a way to avoid the shame of actually admitting that I am judgmental,
Yeah.
or I'm trying not to be judgmental because I'm trying to be seen as that by other people. So there's
Mm,
like the managing of like the image,
mm,
so I
mm,
mean,
mm.
this is where, yeah, so to me this is not so much about non-judgmental, because again it can become this other task of like effort
Yeah, yeah,
trying not to be judgmental. It's more about um that you are sort of that I am very judgmental, okay, like I I mean, like I can like really go for it sometimes.
yeah,
And but like I said, I don't derive any satisfaction out of it.
yeah.
It's almost like when I'm, let's say, judgmental of a certain maybe quality in someone,
Mm,
like being an asshole,
mm,
right?
mm,
Right?
mm.
I'm not standing apart, because I've been an asshole multiple times in my life. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
so so that's what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
It doesn't come from the I got you, I
yeah,
caught you. It's seeing things because you see them in others and you see them in themselves, and you don't derive kind of any kind of satisfaction
yeah,
or sense of superiority sitting on your high horse and saying,
yeah,
yeah. So I would say
yeah.
that.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I really like the way you put that, because yeah, it's like it's that heaviness is not like, it comes from a light space. That kind of, yeah, sure, we can be judgmental, we can be ourselves, but it doesn't have that contraction, that heaviness behind it of like, you're not supposed to be that way. But it's like you can still call it out. It's like that.
Totally.
That's the difference. Yeah, for
And
sure.
the same with boundaries, it's like now, uh, like I can't tell you, I've never been so good at setting boundaries
Mm,
as of late, in that, because again, that when that preoccupation with self-image
mm,
drops, and you're
mm,
sort of like, you know, it's the boundaries just sort of happen naturally. They're so
Yeah.
common sense, but they're very healthy and very pragmatic. They really don't
Mm,
come from like the sort of identity defensive place or anything
mm,
like that. You just it just makes sense. It just makes
mm.
I was saying to someone recently, I was reading something by Jeff Foster. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff
Yeah, I
Foster.
know a bit of his stuff. Yeah.
And in one of his, I think it was like a poem, and he said, you know, I set boundaries like a motherfucker, and I love like a child. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
the two doesn't. You
Yeah.
can totally love someone and totally understand, for example, why they are needy or whatever, and
Mm,
still set the boundary because it
mm.
just makes sense, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
at the time. So again, from that non-divided whatever place, or you know, however to
Mm.
call it. Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that's what stops that just natural synergy between the two of like the setting the boundary and still loving like unconditionally. What stops that is the self-image, right? Like that, I've noticed that within myself. It's like there was that's been a big part of the process for me, was learning to set boundaries again, because there was the self-image of, just like compassion or something, like, but it was, it was from that divided space. And then it became clearer and clearer to me that it's like when everything starts to fall away, like all the self-images, you start to see through all your own bullshit, then you just be how you are, then you do everything naturally, intuitively, because there's no fear anymore of what if I don't come across as
Yes.
that guy, like the guy that the mind wants to be, like that's, and then everything happens. So for me, it's like there was phases of both sides of like, okay, less boundaries than ever before, and then more boundaries than ever before. And that was part of still disentangling the where there was still fixation of how I should be, and I feel like I'm still learning through this, like where to still, like the integration goes on. But yeah, that space of like the integration between the two comes when there's no more like, oh, okay, I'm not any guy. I'm not the compassionate guy. I am whatever, It's like
Yeah.
there's no
And
self-image. Yeah.
that stuff can still come up. Like you can
Yeah.
actually have stuff come up like, oh, you know, maybe I should have said it you know, differently,
Yeah.
or you know, or how should I say that so that, you know, the person, yeah, but it's
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
can come up, but it's almost such explain. It's almost like a certain pattern that's been there for such a long time that sort of still
Mm.
kicks in,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, but it's impersonal. It's sort
Yeah.
of impersonal. So it's like free to be there. So it's not, so again, it's like it's so radical that it's really not a case of anything not being there, you know, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that
Exactly.
everything is actually free to be, including certain patterns.
Yeah. Yeah.
um but it's like they lose the juice. You know, it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they sort of lose the, it's like, you know, if you have like a pattern as like a balloon, you know, the balloon can kind of sort of float, but it's like the air just goes out of it, you know, like it just loses the importance
Yeah.
and the kind of emotional charge,
Mm.
uh you know,
Mm.
that
Mm.
goes with those patterns, but the patterns
Yeah.
can totally continue to play out.
Yeah. It's
In
so
my
true.
experience, they still play out
Yeah.
big time.
Yeah. I agree completely. It's like it's because it becomes so, like, I think this is the point you made, and that's what's key for me, is that it becomes so impersonal. Like that's what like takes away the juice. It's like, oh, it's not, it's the conditioning, it's the,
Yeah.
but it, just to go back to what you were saying earlier, because I really like the way you put it earlier, is like it can be so difficult initially to have to see all of those parts of ourselves that we're like, that are all like, eventually it becomes, okay, this is not me, this is just coming and going. But like initially it's like, oh wow, like look at all of this like shit. And just, yeah, for anybody, I guess, going through it, it's like it doesn't matter how much is there, it just, it kind of, it unwinds, like, and no matter how terrifying it is as well, like for me, like seeing the validate, that was one of the big ones. All the validation, it terrified me at one point. It was like, how am I ever going to sort this out? It's like there's so much validation seeking, and then it's just, you just have to see that though. You kind of have to
But it's such
see.
a freedom to see that, right? I mean, it can
Yeah.
be painful. It can be painful, and I recognize that, and I get that, you know, it's hard, but it's so beautiful to see because it just
Yeah.
frees you up from that kind of like living as this, like some people talk about it as like the closed fist, you know, that every time you see something for what it is and you just simply honestly admit that, right? Then like that fist starts to open and open and you start feeling a bit more and more free to be the
Yeah.
fuck up, you know, to be
Yeah.
like I call it like a, you know, a perfect, this is not my words, I wish I could come up with this, but a genius line is like we are the sort of like a perfectly put together mess, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, so it's like it's really it's the dance between the two, and there's such freedom, and a lot of it, like I really recommend a large dose of compassion when this stuff comes up, you know, like toward yourself, you know, it's like it
Yeah.
really is okay, you know, and it's really good for you for this stuff to come up, you know,
Yeah.
that the stuff that we, anything that we don't even want to admit to ourselves, you know, anything that we'd rather not look at, and you know, stuff like that, it's pure gold. It's quite literally like,
Yeah.
isn't it amazing that like the very stuff that we're so afraid of to
Yeah.
kind of be revealed, to admit, and so on, it's actually a gateway to freedom.
Yeah.
It's actually where the juice is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like that worst possible thing that it feels like, that part of ourselves that we were so
Mm,
terrified of. It's like when that really is revealed, that is exactly, it's so counterintuitive to the mind, because when the
yeah.
mind imagines spirituality, it's like, oh, there's freedom from all of this stuff. And then it's like, yeah, sure, you experience freedom, but it's through the relief of having seen all of that.
Mm,
And compassion, I love as well, because that's like was so helpful for me at every point in this journey when things just, were completely overwhelming. It was
yeah.
like, it's just that compassion of just like, it's okay, and that just kind of releases something. And it's like you said, it's such a relief. It's like, it's okay, but you have to see it. It's like I had to come to that point where I was like, whoa, more Zoom.
You must have made a great point, Kyle.
Reality
Someone has just validated you.
Reality is really joining in on our conversation. Yeah, pointing us in the right direction. That's amazing.
Oh, it's easy to lose the
Um,
plot though, like when you have like
yeah,
balloons flying around
balloons.
and all
Maybe
sorts
it's
of
the
other
opposite. Maybe
yeah.
it's not saying that we're doing the right thing. Maybe it's saying, okay, you're going off track. Here's some balloons to distract you.
Maybe saying like, okay, shut up, you know,
Shut
like
up. You've made your point.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's quite a honestly, it's quite a it's quite a ride.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I want to mention, I have no idea why that came up, that there can be a kind of opposite to that, which I noticed because of seeing people one-on-one. So I have these
Yeah.
different, you know, angles of like how
Yeah.
that plays out for people when um there's such a obsession with digging for things. Like, I need to find that shadow. I need to find what else is there. I need to find whatever. And again, there's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes it can get so tricky that that obsession is actually avoidance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're actually so continuously looking for something away
Mm.
or somewhere that you miss what's here already evident, like
Yeah.
shame. So let's say you're experiencing shame is arising, and rather than allowing yourself to feel that shame, you'll go
Yeah.
searching for why you feel shame, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, let me just be, I'm so curious, I'm going to be curious and open, and I'm going to go into finding what's behind that shame and whatever. And this is totally innocent, but it's like one of the ways how, you know, the mind is, I'm telling you, it's like the greatest trickster,
Yeah.
the resistance, you know, how that works. That it can even turn something that on the surface looks like a really good idea, like makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually that's actually avoiding the shame, that's
Yeah.
actually avoiding the experience of shame, which is probably one of the hardest ones to feel, so I
Oh, for
get that as
sure. Yeah,
well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that I love that you brought that up. It's such a because it's the thing that comes up for me the most as well. Like, because I also work with people in like a mix of awakening and helping them recover from whatever their nervous system issues on the funny thing. We don't really have time to get into all of this as well, but the relation for me, that's just what fascinates me, is the relationship between, like, they're not separate, right? This whole chronic illness thing and the awakening thing, it's like it's the nervous system all linked together. It's the kundalini, it's whatever, it's all these fixations and stuff. So there's a lot to unpack there. But the point I wanted to make is that comes up so much as well, is this, like, looking for the emotion work. Like, I get that so much as well. It's like someone will be sitting in frustration, maybe like that's a big one that comes up, like sitting with frustration, being like, I don't know where the emotion work is. I'm never. Oh, and it's shame as well, often as well. It's like, I'm never going to be able to do the emotion work. I'm not good enough to do the emotion. And I'm like, that's it. That's the emotion right there. But like you said, the mind's always pointing you out there instead of like what's behind it. It's like, what's behind all that looking? That, like, where is the shame? Where is the emotions? It's like that need to look for it. That's where you got to actually look. But that's where I think working with somebody is so helpful, because it's so innocent as well, like natural for us to not see that, but it's so clear for somebody that's gone through it as well. Like, that's the beautiful thing of working with someone, is like, I noticed it as well when someone is saying it, it just pops up so clearly. It's like, okay, but what are you not wanting to feel right now? So
I sometimes feel like I I don't know like what to even call what I do, but it's like sometimes I feel like calling myself a travel guide because it's like quite literally. It's like, I've been to Paris, I've been to these places. I'm familiar with this territory. So if you're there, I can kind of point you, like, that's the best cafe is that way, or like, this is where you should. It's more like that, than like or like a co-traveler, that's like been places and can,
that's exactly what it is. It's you, like, you've been there and you can show the territory.
But the shame bit as well, it's what's really extraordinary actually is that the more we're actually allow ourselves to be with, say, since we're at shame, is recently my favorite one. Somehow it comes up all the time. Since by virtue of when we really allow, and that's actually how we know that we allow ourselves to fully be with the experience, because two things will happen usually. Like, I'm not saying like as a rule, which is like one of the options, where just by virtue of being with the emotion fully, two things usually happen. One, it naturally dissipates. And that's how you know, because it's like you allow yourself so fully that it transmutes almost into nothing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it goes. Or by virtue of being with the shame or whatever other uncomfortable emotion, whatever needs to be seen about it, so like a story, a belief, a thought, or whatever, it will reveal itself. So actually, this is great, because that stops the kind of effort digging for things, pushing things, forcing things to come out, rather than allow them to come out just by being as much as possible in the experience, and again, I totally know this, like, it's freaking easier said than done, in particular when we're sort of at the start of even helping the body get used to being with the discomfort, which is such a huge part of this journey, to help the body relax into uncomfortable sensations.
Exactly. It's so challenging at first, but I'm gonna have to I want to just keep on talking, but I've just seen the time. I've got somewhere I've got to get to soon.
It's okay.
but yeah, I could just feel like every time you say something, I just want to kind of keep on expanding on that. But yeah, I guess just to wrap up then, um, yeah, it's so challenging at first, and it's just, I guess this is what I like to remind people of. It's a skill like anything else, that like sitting in the discomfort. It's incredible how, as we do it more, we're able to just like start small and then just go a little bit deeper
Yeah.
and a little bit deeper, and just like, and that compassion as well. You're never going to get it perfectly right. It's a messy process.
Mm-hmm.
You're not perfect. You're gonna distract yourself. That's another big one, is like, no, like for me, like the distraction all played out, and it's like the same, like we're talking about Suzanne earlier. um I once heard her speak, and it was so relieving in myself at the time to hear her say like how she went through these phases where all of these just distraction behaviors just, and you let yourself do it. And for me, that was part of seeing how, okay, next time I actually want to feel the emotion, because this is so dissatisfying, it's so numbing, it's so, so like all of that kind of plays out, and it's just messy, it's like so messy, but
Yeah,
that's,
and it actually gets to the point where there comes a point where it doesn't even matter whether you're resisting or not. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's like
exactly.
there's such a beingness in a reality as it is, that whether you resist it or not, it just doesn't even apply. Like
Yeah,
it doesn't even matter,
yeah.
So you're kind of okay even when resistance is there, then you're okay with that too,
Yeah.
and so that's how radical that is. It's like this real radical okayness, that we're so not
Yeah.
accustomed to. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, last point. Like,
Yeah.
that you see, we can just keep going. I'm never gonna get to my next thing, but what do I want to say? That's what makes it so tricky to talk, like so nuanced to talk about as well, because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I find like, okay, it's resistance, like it's unconscious resistance that you want to try and dissolve in someone, but eventually as well, it's like you got to point out that even the resistance is okay. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, that's the beauty of the one-on-one work, I suppose, is then you can just reflect to somebody what's happening. But speaking about it generally is always going to confuse
Yes.
somebody, because
Yeah.
it's like, maybe in your stage you actually just need to allow the resistance to be there, but maybe in the early stages you need to become more aware of how resistance is driving things. So it's like, it's so,
Yeah, so
yeah.
it's important to accept that this is, until it's seen as paradox,
Mm, mm,
it's going to sound confusing. So it's just
yeah,
accept the fact that you'll hear so many people talk about it, that it's going to be confusing, but that's why it's an invitation to keep on going back to your experience and
yeah,
what's true for you, and look for what, we spoke about it earlier, that it's so important, rather than wonder when you hear all these perspectives and different approaches, rather than wonder which one is correct, which one is not correct, right or wrong. Forget about that. Just
yeah,
focus on what works for you. Test
mm,
it. Go with one approach. See if does it do anything for you. Does it free you up? Is being with this teacher doing maybe the opposite to freeing you up?
yeah,
Not because
yeah,
the teacher is wrong, but just because maybe this is not for you now. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
something. So keep on going back to your direct experience and keep on going back to what works for you, rather than what works for anyone else or doesn't work,
mm,
and in
mm.
that way you cancel a lot of that confusion that can really be like a mind fuck, which is one of the reasons, why I'm primarily glad that I missed all that part,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
of discovering so many perspectives and so many, models and things, and being like, completely overwhelmed by the thing, so
Yeah.
yeah, this would be my best kind of unsolicited advice.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
always what I've gotten from you. Like when, like the first time I ever heard you speak with Angelo, was like the main takeaway that was helpful, really helpful for me at the time, was you're pointing out that it's got nothing to do with anybody else's path. Just keep coming back to your life as it is, life showing up, and yeah, I mean, let's leave it there because that's such
Yeah.
a great one to end on.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it is. It's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Um,